Hello everyone. Today is Pranjal's fifth and last lecture on matrix model and JT gravity. Sorry, sixth lecture. Sorry. Uh, Over to you, Pranjal.
Okay, thanks Shubham. And since today is my last lecture, let me just thank all the organizers for putting up this wonderful uh, workshop together in such difficult times and for giving me the opportunity to talk about this topic, which is quite recent and also quite interesting. So thanks all the organizers. So let me begin with talking about what where we left off last time. So up till the last lecture, what we have seen, what we established was that in Jacques-Tuttle-Boehm theory is exactly a matrix model, and the way we did that is by computing higher genus contributions to the Jacques-Tuttle-Boehm partition function or similar observables, and demonstrating that they obey the same recursion relationships which should be obeyed by a matrix model, basically the topological recursion relationships that need to derived for us. And the way we did that is by first demonstrating that the higher genus contributions in the Jacques-Tuttle-Boehm gravity is proportional to the Weil-Peterson volumes, and then we use the derivation of Aina and Oranta, where they have demonstrated that the recursion Mizrakhani's recursion relationships of Weil-Peterson volumes is directly related to the topological recursion relationships of the matrix model. So that's how we established that perturbatively Jacques-Tuttle-Boehm theory is the same as some matrix model. Okay, and using this from the physics point of view, what we were able to obtain was that for the case of, say, spectral form factor, which was the observable we have been looking at as a probe of unitarity, we demonstrated that after the initial decay, if we account for the perturbative contributions of the Hertzsprung surfaces, then we are able to retrieve the ramp behavior at late times. Okay, so but what we were not able to retrieve, or what we were not able to obtain from the perturbative contributions, was still the plateau behavior that one expects at late time, because of course that is what we started with by demonstrating that at late times there's a plateau value which is exponentially smaller than the value spectral form factor starts with. So the ramp cannot continue indefinitely. So today what we would do is we would try to understand the origins of the plateau behavior in terms of the non-perturbative effects. Uh, what we would do is first motivate that there are non-perturbative corrections. Then we would see how these non-perturbative corrections play a role in a simple matrix model, uh, say a Gaussian matrix model, and demonstrate that they are the ones that give rise to the long time plateau. And it is very similar to how it works in the actual matrix model, which the Jacques-Tuttle-Boehm theory is dual to. But since that calculation is kind of harder, I would not go into that calculation, but establish the technology which is needed to do this calculation. Before we start, I want to emphasize that what we'll be doing today would be within the matrix model, and is still not a computation within the gravity. So what the origins of these non-perturbative effects in the gravity are is not very well understood. Uh, there are ways to understand it by drawing analogies to the known results in the matrix model in terms of deep brains, but it's still within the Jakob-Teitelbaum theory. What are these non-perturbative effects is not very well known to this point in my knowledge. And then in the second half of the talk, I would establish another technology to study the non-perturbative effects, which is rather general and captures both the ramp and the plateau in a more general quantum field theory. So without wasting more time, let me start with discussing why, first of all, motivating why there are non-perturbative effects. So, good. Uh, so if you look at the perturbation series that occurs in the JT theory in terms of the genus expansion, then as we deduced in one of the discussions that we had uh, in the first lecture day before yesterday, the perturbation series has coefficients that scales like 2g factorial. Okay. And the fact that the coefficients of the perturbation series scales like 2g factorial tells us that this is an asymptotic expansion as opposed to convergent expansion. Okay, and which signals from our known knowledge of how non-perturbative physics works that this leads to non-perturbative effects at the order of e to the power minus c times L, which is same as order e to the power minus c times e to the power s naught, because if you remember, L, which was the size of the matrix in our case, was same as e to the power s naught, where s naught was some kind of entropy parameter from the field theory side. So that was the motivation. Good. So like looking at the perturbative expansion and also realizing that the perturbative expansion does not give us the long-term plateau behavior tells us that we need to still make some corrections which have not yet been captured. Okay, so so therefore we need to develop a technology which through which we can capture these perturbative effects. Another thing to note is that the non-perturbative effects they play a role. They are really a consequence of uh, like uh, the underlying discreteness of the spectrum. And if you remember from the first lecture that where we discussed the unitarity problem, uh, the the way to see this was that the ramp, the late time plateau, sorry, not the ramp, the late time plateau was really arising at the time scales wherein we needed to approximate e to the power it em minus en by and only we could only look at the diagonal terms. So at late times, because of the fluctuations, the mean is really given by the diagonal terms, and that's why we were looking at energies which were em equals en in the expression of SSF, spectral form factor, and which tells us that what is really playing the role is really short distance behavior of the energy eigenstate, like the behavior of neighboring energy eigenstates in the spectrum of the theory. Like this is really small. uh, the major physics is governed by the short distance, the neighboring eigenstates here. Okay, which tells us that the time scale, the relevant time scale, should be the time scales which scale as mean level spacing of the theory. The level spacing, the energy differences, mean energy differences between the eigenstates of the spectrum, and this often is same as 1 over what we call Thouless time. Sorry, Heisenberg time, my bad. This is 1 over Heisenberg time. Okay, and in general this scales like e to the power minus uh, sorry, no, delta is, yeah, e to the power minus L. Okay, which is same as e to the power what we want e to pass. Good. So to start our computation, so the what really helps in understanding the non-perturbative effects in any theory is to look at a new class of observables known as the determinant operators. Okay, so determinant operators are really the ones, determinant operators, which help us capture the non-perturbative physics. Okay, one way to kind of motivate this is, I'll motivate this in a second, but when I say determinant operators, I mean say an operator like this, psi of E, which is determinant of E minus H. Okay, e to the power minus L by 2 VE. Okay, and the reason they are more useful is because non-perturbative effects really contribute at order 1 in these observables. So not at order 1, sorry, yeah, let me not say order 1, at leading order, so whatever is the leading order. Okay, so and a way to see this is, first, if I look at uh, determinant of E minus H, I can really rewrite this as exponential of trace log of E minus H, where I've used the identity that log of determinant of some matrix M is trace log of matrix M. Okay, and this quantity one can see. So now, for example, we know that we have been studying the resolvents, which is a single derivative del E of trace log of E minus H is like the R1 that we have been studying, 1 over trace of 1 over E minus H. Okay, so it's an exponentiated version of the kind of perturbative observables we have been looking at. and uh, good. And like I'll quickly motivate how why we expect that the non-perturbative effects contribute at leading order in this case is because suppose the determinant operator, for example, there's a physical quantity which is equivalent to determinant operator, and it has an expansion, like 1 over n plus some expansion, perturbative expansion like this, plus some non-perturbative expansion like this. Okay, 1 plus 1 over n, so on. Okay, and the physical quantity that we are interested in, as is in the case of the determinant operator, is related to say the log of this quantity, the expansion of the quantity which captures the non-perturbative corrections. So if I have, for example, in this case, the perturbative and the non-perturbative uh, physics both being captured at the leading order, then when I expand the log uh, in small parameter of the non-perturbative effect, you see that this really starts contributing something at this order 1 over n, which is coming from the expansion of the first log of the first term, plus e to the power minus n over n, 1 plus 1 over n. So you see in this expansion of what we are calling the physical quantity, the non-perturbative effects are really contributing at some lower order, while they are contributing at the leading order in the determinant equivalent kind of quantity. So this is how in general when we exponentiate a term, they start contributing at leading order when they're at sub-leading order for uh, operators of physical interest. Good. So in this case, like going back to what we are interested in computing, which is this determinant operator. In the case of determinant operator, I can write determinant as exponential of trace log e minus h, and then I realize that e to the power x averaged over certain quantity, averaged over x. In this case, the averaging is really the random matrix disorder integration. Okay, this can be written as exponential of expectation value of x plus half expectation value of x square connected, and so on, 1/3 x cube connected, and so on. Okay, so what we are interested in is really computing x expectation value of x, which is expectation of value of trace of e minus h. Okay, I would call this the disk contribution. Okay, and the reason for calling it the disk is really slightly different from why we have been calling what we have been calling the disk contribution till now. We'll be calling this disk contribution, but the motivation behind this terminology really comes from the connection to the d-branes that I would discuss in a little bit. So this has some d-brane interpretation which I have not yet described, and I'll describe later. And it is from that point of view that I'm calling this guy a disk contribution. And similarly, so it does look very similar to what we had been doing in terms of like what we were calling disk contribution up till now, but you'll see this is still really some different physical quantity. And similarly, this would be called the cylinder contribution, and I would refer to the method that I'm using as so this method is called disk, and I'll be referring to this as the disk and cylinder method. Okay, so now that we know what we want to compute in terms of the determinant operator, we want to compute the expectation value of x, okay, which is the expectation value of trace log e minus h. In general, I'm not gonna do this with a more general potential, since this, as you might expect, is, so I'll try to keep it as general as possible, but when I'll be doing the calculations, I'll mostly stick to the results of the quadratic matrix model. Okay, also because there is a good way, in the case of double scale quadratic matrix model, all these non-perturbative effects also can be computed exactly, and there is in a way it will give us a good uh, way to compare how what perturbative physics is capturing, what the non-perturbative physics is capturing in terms of the spectrum of the theory and other things. So yeah, it's just so much so much more is known, and it's good to develop an intuition and understanding of what's going on in terms of the quadratic matrix model. So that's why I will be demonstrating this technology only for that. Good. So going uh, going back to the calculation, what we wanted to compute was expectation value of x. Okay, and this I can write as e to the power s naught, okay, integral d e prime r 1 of e prime up till e, which is basically the same thing as what I had written. So I'm writing right now the integrated version of this equation. Okay, the trace log is integral of the resolvent. Okay, and along with the factor of e to the power minus L by 2v, which I had introduced in the definition of my observable psi of e, I can write expectation value of psi of e as exponential of e to the power s naught d prime y of e prime up till e. Okay, maybe I should really write y of not e but y of z, where we also know what the relationship between y of z and y of between z and e. So the z square was minus e in the in the case of yeah. So this was our definition. Okay. Good. So now for the case of quadratic matrix model, we know that y of z is z. Okay, but the energy is minus of z square, okay, which is a multivalued function. So basically what I'm saying is that y of z is a multivalued function in the space of E. Okay, which means that in this particular expression that we have here, we have the option of staying in two branches. When we integrate this function, we have a choice of branch over which we integrate. Okay, and the choice of branch, so basically what we have is that psi of e should therefore be given by integral over each of the two branches. Is not times z 0 to z d e prime z prime of y z prime plus so where this one is computed on first branch, this one is computed on second branch. Okay, and then the expression, since we know in this case what it would look like, I didn't write down the expression. Just a minute. Yeah, for the case of the quadratic matrix model, we really have this as a times e to the power not minus 2 z cube by 3 plus p exp e to the power s naught to to the leading order in to the leading order, the answer for the psi of e for the quadratic matrix model is given by this. Okay, so what I have done is really computed the disk contribution on both the sheets for capturing both the perturbative effect and the perturbative effect and the non-perturbative effect. Okay, in the case of JT, just in this case, let me, since I have it here, I'll tell you what the disk of Z for JT is an integral over S naught 0 to Z, okay, sine 2 pi Z by 4 pi times minus 2 Z dz. So different depending on which branch you're working with, it will be plus or minus, and this is really plus of minus sine 2 pi z minus 2 pi z cos 2 pi z by s naught by 8 pi cube. Okay, so this is how you compute the this is how one computes the leading order non-perturbative effect, both the perturbative and the non-perturbative effect to the leading order.
Shubham has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, maybe this is a stupid question, but like in the psi integral, why are you summing over the branch cuts? Like usually you just choose a branch cut, right? I mean, you,
Yes, and I'm saying that when you think of computing the psi, there is this is like getting a contribution from one branch. So you can think of it also as, say, each of the branch, the solution on each of the branch cut is like a saddle point.
I
One is
see.
a leading one is not a leading one. So you add the contribution of both of them.
I see. Okay, okay, okay.
Okay.
So
In fact, this was also mentioned by I don't know who in one of the previous lectures, that these non-perturbative effects can be seen also as a solution of differential equations, where
oh, I
in general,
see.
uh,
So then you sum over it, make a
yes.
linear combination. I see, I
Yes.
see. Okay, okay,
I mean that is slightly, so this is more physical. I thought that this technology of disk and cylinders was slightly more physical, so I'm discussing this now. But there is also this technology wherein you can demonstrate that the solutions, for the determinant operator, the expectation value of the determinant operator and such non-perturbative operators is really, these are, they are really solutions of some differential equations, and then it corresponds to
yeah,
two
then
different possible
yeah, then
solutions.
it's yeah, okay, okay.
And this language about the saddle points will become more clear in the second method that I'll be discussing in say about 15 minutes.
What are this capital A and capital B?
Very good. The capital B and capital B are some coefficients that I still need to fix. So right now I don't know these coefficients. Okay, I was going to talk about this once I also computed the loop corrections to the answer here, because the one loop corrections often contribute multiplicatively, which is what will happen. So once I have the full answer of the leading disk answer and the one loop correction, which is the contribution of the cylinder, then I'll talk more about these coefficients. So basically these are the coefficients which one needs to fix by looking at the asymptotic behavior, expected asymptotic behavior of the physical observables. Okay, in this case it is much easier to kind of easier to fix this, because in quadratic matrix model you can do exact integrals in the double scale limits and you can get some Airy functions, and then getting the fixing these coefficients a and b is really by looking and comparing the answer to the uh, comparing the answer of this to the uh, asymptotics of the Airy function. So that's how you fix the coefficients basically. Basically when by looking at the asymptotic behavior, which is what you also do for say solutions of differential equations. I mean yeah, so that is that.
I mean, do you really have two coefficients? So that's what I'm confused about.
So I'm sorry.
Do you really have separate two coefficients A and B, or shouldn't they be related if
Up
it's
till
a
an overall
contour?
scaling, it is just the relative coefficient. But see, since you will need to fix the even like in the case of say when you're comparing it these answers with the area asymptotics, you would even know the overall coefficient of the function. So and in the normalized quantities that one would compute in general. So for example, the physical quantity that we are how do we obtain a resolvent from this determinant operator? We take del E of say psi, okay, which so determinant gives me basically the resolvent of E times determinant of E minus H. Okay, but once I normalize this by say diffusion of another psi here, so that I have a diffusion by determinant, then those overall coefficients won't matter. So yes, it is really the relative coefficient that matters. Okay.
Could you say again what is this disk set? I didn't understand.
Sorry, which part?
Disk Z. What are we calculating in this disk Z?
Disk Z is the leading order contribution. Right now I am just calling this 1 point function of x here as disk contribution. So I'm saying that in yeah, this is an NSYK. So this was the disk contribution in quadratic matrix model, and this is the disk contribution in SYK, in the Schwarzian theory, say, where I've just, or maybe the JT theory, where I have computed the expectation value of this x operator, just 1 point function of the x operator, the trace log operator.
Okay.
Okay, good. So let me proceed. Since I talked about the normalization here, the next interesting observable is the inverse determinant. Now it would look like I'm talking about something trivial, and in this disk cylinder language, it really does look trivial, because let me call it psi of z is say, no, before I was doing that, my bad, I'm sorry, I wanted to compute the one loop correction first before I went into this. So the one loop corrections are computed by computing the x square connected contribution. Okay, so it's really an integral over R02 this time, or maybe R2 this time, the connected R2s, but to the leading order it would be just R02. Similarly, because here I said R1, but what I computed to the leading order in this computations was an integral only over R01. So x square connected is an integral over R02 E1 E2. Okay. And again, once you compute this quantity, the cylinder contribution, what you get is minus log z1 z plus z2. And if you remember, this quantity was some universal quantity, so you know this answer for matrix model, one cut matrix model, just by knowing the edges of the matrix model. Okay, so I used that knowledge of the universal answer in R02, plugged it in here, did the integral, and got this expression of minus log z1 plus z2. But if you go back and look at psi of e, okay, so when I wrote this as exponential of x plus half x square and so on, in that case, both these x are really evaluated at the same energy, because there is only one energy argument here. Okay, so I need to take the limit of E1 going to E2 in this case, and which is same as taking Z1 going to Z2. Okay, and then this contribution becomes minus log 2Z. Okay, and summing, putting together the one loop contribution and the zero loop leading and contribution, so basically adding these two together and exponentiating it, I get that the value for the determinant operator to the leading order is just 1 over square root of 2z time exponential of whatever disk contribution is. So now I'm writing it like this because R02, as we saw, was really universal, so I can always write it like this. But the disk contribution itself would depend on what theory I'm looking at, the spectral curve of that theory. So I can write this, and then of course I can write this, plus I can write 1 over square root of 2z exponential of no, sorry, I should not have I in this, like, I would of course compute the disk on both, so I'll have this plus the non-perturbative contribution here. Okay, so I'll have both the contribution here with the one loop correction. Okay, now since I'm also interested in normalizing my observable so that I obtain only, say, the resolvent and not resolvent times determinant, you need to look at also the inverse determinant. And while this might look that this is, well, trivial, I just need to, and since I'm only treating the terms in the exponential perturbatively, this would only mean that if I define psi tilde of E as e to the power L by 2 VE times determinant of E minus H, then this should just be exponential of minus x plus half x square and so on. So they basically just differs in terms of signs, but there's more trick to it, and that happens precisely because when you have determinants in the denominator, then you really introduce poles in your integration. Okay, so oops. How do I move this? Okay, never mind. So because now, since there are determinants sitting in this expression in the denominator, in the integral, when integrating over the matrices, this really means that I have introduced some some poles in the space, in the complex space of E. Okay, and then I need to treat this more carefully because I need to while doing the integral, I cannot take E to be exactly real, and I would use the standard well-known prescription by taking E to E plus or minus I epsilon. Okay, and then I am left with making choices for the contours while doing my integrations. Okay, and when I'm left with that choice, I'm that means that depending on how I regulate my energy, my saddle points will change, and there would really be two solutions for this for the inverse determinant functions. Okay, and in a moment you would see that in the resolvent calculation, so I would not really go into the detail, but yes, I would demonstrate how these two choices for the saddle for the choice of contours plays a role. It plays basically the same role even in resolvent. When we define resolvent as this minus h, we have to regulate this to define either trace of 1 over E minus and plus of I epsilon minus h, where the minus sign is for the advanced propagator and the plus sign is for the retarded resolvent. So basically this happens because there is a branch cut in this observable, and then whether you approach it from the top or bottom, the value changes. Okay, good. So while computing the inverse determinant using this method, it really gets washed off the fact that one needs to make different choices of regulator in this case. But one can kind of yes, one can resolve this by thinking about all possible choices in the branch cut of the E plane, E as a function of Z plane, and then trying to match the asymptotics, the A and B functions, such that one gets the right consistent answer in the large energy limits. But let me demonstrate by computing, say, the resolvent. Okay. So the resolvent, as I wrote previously, is 1 over E minus H, is determinant E of derivative with respect to E of determinant of E minus H upon determinant of E prime minus H in the limit E prime goes to E. Okay. And using the same disk and cylinder method, what we'll see is that this can be written as contribution of the disk minus the contribution of disk prime. So Z prime is the Z corresponding to E prime plus half times cylinder contribution between Z cylinder contribution between Z prime and cylinder contribution with Z and Z prime at the boundaries. Okay, and naively the answer for this basically boils down to, so I'm calling this thing capital psi of Z prime. Okay. The computation boils down to Z plus Z prime upon 2 times Z prime and exponential of disk Z minus disk Z prime. Okay. Now you would immediately come and ask me that there are like many possibilities for choosing the branches on each of these, a branch on this, a branch on this, and then there are many possible permutations, and the way to fix the right combination of the permutations is really by making the matching with the right asymptotics of these observables. And in the case of the quadratic matrix model, since one has access to exact answers, one can do this by matching to the asymptotics of the Airy functions that arise in the exact computation of the quadratic matrix model. And using that, what one would find, for example, is that R plus or minus of E, the resolvent, okay, is equal to minus plus the power is not y of R square root of E, okay, plus minus for E greater than 0, and then I have e to the power s. So here I have kind of made already the choices for the branch cuts. Okay, and the way I made those choices is really by comparing with asymptotics. And from this resolvent, by taking the imaginary part of the resolvent, one can compute the density of states, which comes as rho naught of E, where rho naught of E is the density of states directly related to the spectral curve. Okay, the leading order density of states. E cos 2 pi this would be for E greater than 0, and minus 1 upon 8 pi E exponential for E less than 0. Okay, and this, so this is like a general way you could generalize this for any matrix model in general, and to and compute these determinant operators which capture the non-perturbative physics. So for example, in the expression that I have written, this is your leading answer, but this is the non-perturbative correction to the density of states. And one sees that even in the forbidden region, which is energy is less than 0, one gets an exponentially small non-perturbative correction to the density of states. Okay, yes, Semanti?
Hi. So you are writing psi z part. That
Yes.
you have written psi z before, right? So in that formula you had only 1 by root over 2z. So it is coming from there, right? Like you define psi e 1 by root over 2z exponential of this z, right?
Yes.
And when you are writing psi z prime, there is extra z plus z prime in the numerator. That is
How
not
do
coming from that expression.
so this part, yeah, the z plus z prime is coming from this extra cylinder part that I have in this in the computation of the resolvent. So if I would have just computed psi of E, then I have this cylinder. If I'm computing this psi tilde of E, then I have only one the other cylinder with both the energy arguments on the cylinder being same, but there'll be a connected part only when I'm computing a quantity like this, where both the determinants are simultaneously inserted. Does that answer?
Okay, so there will be other part with cylinder and ticks and other things. You are not writing that, right?
Which part I'm not writing?
Writing psi z prime. So there
Yes.
is other part like cylinder into this, like that, right?
The disconnected, those are disconnected parts, right? So I'm not writing that. I wrote only the connected parts in the exponent. Okay, though disconnected part gets generated when you expand the exponent. In the exponent, you only take the contributions of the connected diagrams. That's why I'm only writing everything here is connected. I'm not writing disk times cylinder in the exponential.
Okay, so my question was, this is not coming from that psi e you have written before 1 by root over 2z. So there also we should have then one z kind of thing, right? Like if you see similarity of
Uh,
Slide you written shy E, right?
in the first expression on this page I'm showing.
No, not previous slide. I guess.
This one?
1 by root over 2z. Yeah, this one. This one
Yes.
correction.
Yes.
So from here you are finding psi E prime, right? So
Yes.
here Z in the above, there is Z plus Z prime. That's what I
Yes, that is the contribution of this connected part, which would only arise once you write both the determinant operators together. So this is arising because you are doing the averaging over the Hamiltonian. This averaging process is what is generating this connected part. I see what you're saying, that if I just multiplied psi of E with psi tilde of E here, I would not generate the Z plus Z prime, right? Which is true, but that is true because in each of these expressions, so psi of E had only disk plus half cylinder, psi tilde of E had minus disk plus half time cylinder. This contribution, which is cylinder with different energy arguments, is arising only because I am computing not determinant operators individually, but determinant over determinant operator simultaneously. So this is also related to the fact, like to it you can think of it like this, that when you do the H averaging, so there would be H average over the H arising from the first determinant and the second determinant, which would not exist in the diagrams that you would draw for just one determinant insertion or one inverse determinant insertion. Okay, great. So just to motivate physically, and to tell you like what are the different answers that we are studying here. So if you look at the square root of E, the spectral curve for the uh, spectral curve for the quadratic double scale quadratic matrix model, then that is the one given by this blue curve here, right? Then if one corrected the contribution of the spectral curve by adding the one genus contribution, then that is the red curve here, which is what we added to when we were studying the perturbative contributions. Okay, and then like we could keep adding the higher genus contributions, and you see that they are always they start matching the initial contribution very soon. They're not very different, so their corrections are small, of course something that we knew, but they still different from this exact answer that one can compute in the quadratic matrix model in terms of the Airy functions, which is something here, this dotted line going all the way here. And what one sees is that the perturbative contributions, even when they are correct, kind of capturing the correct behavior, they are only capturing some kind of a correct averaged behavior for after certain energy. Basically in this case what one sees is they're not capturing the exact behavior, exact density of state, only up till one level spacing. Starting the second level, they're exactly able to capture the correct density of states in the quadratic matrix model. Okay, and the non-perturbative computation that we did here, where was that cos answer? Yes, this answer is the one that I'm plotting in the orange function. Okay, you see that this is also able to capture these fluctuations around the mean that arise in the Airy function. The only thing that this non-perturbative correction using the disk and cylinder technology that we computed, what it's not able to compute is the answers at very low energies in this case here. But just the combination of perturbative and the non-perturbative calculations that we use in the disk and the cylinder technology is already a good approximation to the exact density of states. Yes, Semanti, do you have a question?
No, I forgot to lower my hands.
Okay, no worries. So right, so let what I want to do in the last say 20 minutes that I have is discuss another technology to compute the non-perturbative corrections, which is really more general in some sense, and while it does not contribute while it does not compute all the heterogeneous corrections, it computes what is more important, as we also argued, at least up to, in our current understanding, the contribution, the cylinder contribution that gives rise to the ramp behavior, and it is also able to capture the leading non-perturbative answer, which gives rise to the plateau behavior. Okay, so a technology which is kind of more generically applicable to a larger class of quantum theories, but uh, it comes at some cost, but that cost is not something that we might be interested in, because it is still able to capture all the interesting physics that gives us to the resolution of unitarity. Okay, so for this part, the references that I'll be following would be this paper by Adnan Sana, and there are the technology itself, like this paper discusses these techniques in reference to ADS-CFT correspondence and holographic theories, while there's another lecture notes by Jack Verba which discusses this technology more generically for many body Hamiltonian. Okay, and I would really be referring to this as the sigma model approach. Okay. So the idea behind this is that you have determinant operators okay let me call this E2, this is E1 plus minus H. This is what you want to compute, because we just use such a operator to compute say a more physical quantity, which is the resolvent, and this could be really written in terms of an integral over some graded vectors which have some bosonic and fermionic part both. So in this case I am writing X as a boson and some fermion. Okay, and I could write this as exponential of I, the graded vector bar, times E minus H times the graded vector. Okay, and this being equal to this is an exact equality. Let me define E. So E, the vector E, is E2 times identity 0 times E1 sorry no E1 times E2 yeah E2 times identity. Okay, and the Hamiltonian itself, I'm using the same notation to write like the Hamiltonian here 0 0. So let me take 5 minutes to explain the notation here. So I'm treating the Hamiltonian as say an L by L matrix. Okay, the S is an L times 1 vector, the S here, and the chi is also an L times 1 Grassmann vector. Okay, now the reason I do this is because I know when I integrate over the bosonic fields, then I generate an inverse determinant, and when I integrate over the Grassmann fields, I generate a determinant. So that's why I took a space of both like the commuting variables and anti-commuting variables, made a vector out of it, and integrated over that vector with the correct kernel, which is given by E minus H, to generate both these determinants here. Just a minute, Arya. I'll just finish and then I'll take your question. And in this case, what I've done is really a direct product of identity, which is a 2 by 2 identity in this the graded space, okay, times the Hamiltonian. So I'm using the same Hamiltonian for my bosonic vector as well as my Grassmann vector. Okay, but I'm using a different argument for energy in the two sectors, because precisely I have different energies coming in the numerator, which corresponds to the Grassmann sector, and the denominator, which corresponds to the bosonic sector. Yes, Agho.
No, probably you have already answered. So this H is which one? This L cross L is the full bigger matrix, right? That should be 2L cross 2L or something.
This H, yeah, so I'm abusing the notation slightly, so but let me put an extra dash here so it becomes bold. So this bold
Right.
H is so this one is not bold. No, my handwriting looks bad. Okay, and this one is not bold. So this is not bold, this is not bold. So this
Right,
H
right.
is L by L, and the bold H is 2L by 2L.
Right. Okay. Okay, Pranjal, probably just it would take a second for you. So can you just remind me, when you are talking about this double scale matrix models, what
Yes.
are those two scales? I mean,
This is the same as what Neetu described for us, right? So when we look at the double scale matrix models, so we start with a single large L matrix model, which has this spectrum,
right.
and then we zoom in to the edge of the spectrum by scaling the energy to energy minus A, which says that so the edges of the spectrum is minus A and A. And by this rescaling, I zoom into, by this shift in energy, I zoom into this side, okay, and then I send A to infinity. So what I obtain is density of states which is proportional to square root of E.
But that would not make your rho normal. The rho eigenvalue density, is it still normalizable?
No, it is not.
Limit?
But so
Because
okay,
all this expression that you got for non-perturbative and all, you have integration over rho E left.
I have integration over rho E left. Yes, it is not normalizable in some sense, because now your spectral curve
Right.
is given by the square root of E function.
Right,
But
exactly.
you begin by the normalized density of state. The way it is normalized is that you start with, say, a well normalized density of states, say 1 minus E square.
Then you will just take the limit or something.
and then I do this shift and I do the scaling, and then I get something which is L upon A to the power 3 by 2,
Okay.
something like this, times pi times square root of E. So now I'm saying that I'm taking L to infinity, I'm taking A to infinity, such
Right.
that L over A to the power 3 by 2
It's
is
fixed.
fixed. And when I do this, that L over A to the power 3 by 2 is fixed, I call this quantity E to the power S naught. And
Right.
then when we do perturbation theory, we are really doing a perturbation theory in this E to the power S naught, which
Perfect.
itself,
Perfect.
this, we can take the 't Hooft limit in some sense, wherein we say that this E to the power S naught is a big quantity.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Thanks. Thanks.
And just to remark, since I'm writing this here, this E to the power S naught, I think if I got my factors correctly, I think E to the power 2 S naught by 3 is kind of the number of states in any energy window. So it is kind of the entropy of the density of states in some sense. So there are large number of states in any energy given in any given energy window of your the scaled spectrum, the square root of E spectrum, and but you're saying that number of states that you would find in any given energy window itself scales like E to the power 2s naught by 3. Okay, good, thanks. Right, so going back to our sigma model, so this is the technology, and the advantage about this for this technology is that you can very easily generalize this to higher determinant insertion. So for example, if I want to compute the 2-point function, say R2, then I can compute something like 2 minus h determinant of E4 minus h upon determinant of E1 minus h determinant of E3 minus h. Okay, and if I take two derivatives with respect to dE2 and dE4, first of all you should see that this generates two factors of trace over 1 over E minus h, trace over 1 over E minus h, which is what is R2. Okay, and this quantity can immediately, of course I'm also taking the limit that E1 goes to E2 and E3 goes to E4 after taking the derivative, so that naturally, like, this technology will help you get the normalized resolvents without any determinant factors anywhere. Okay, so this is, and the way to generalize this is making by making additional copies. So it will be a path integral which looks exactly the same. You'll still have del x bar del x exp exponential of I x bar minus h bold h x, but up to the fact that now I will have some the bold E is like 4 copies, E1, 2, 3, E4. So I take as many copies as I have, like the determinant insertions in just the numerator or just the denominator. Oh no, I take as many copies as I have total determinant insertion. So both the numerator and the denominator. So I can generalize this. I can generalize my bold H to be basically 4 copies of the Hamiltonian. Okay, and in this case my X basically becomes a field which is S, which has 2 copies of bosons and 2 copies of fermions. So let me write this as S X S X transpose. Okay, using the identity that, say, because I'm interested in computing rho, for example, that would really get related to the branch cuts in this R2 function, where one of the energies is with a advanced regulator and the other one is with a retarded regulator. What we usually do in that case is associate advanced and retarded indices with these denominators, as I emphasized, the reason for which I emphasized previously. And in that case, the bosons and fermions are also given the advanced and retarded indices here. Okay, because I would regulate the E1 and E2 with, say, the advanced indices, and E3 and E4 with the retarded indices. Okay, good. So now what I want to emphasize, the reason this technology is more general is because I can write this expression for any theory whose Hamiltonian I know. The trick being that the Hamiltonian that I insert here is really the first quantized Hamiltonian, wherein I have to think of the Hamiltonian as an L by L matrix which generates the time translation in that theory. So I can in principle do this for quantum field theories also, and I can do this in quantum field theories, just that like writing the Hamiltonian for quantum field theories is hard in the first content language. But in principle I can do this, and then I can basically, it boils down to computing physical quantities, basically the ratios of determinants and their derivatives, using this path integral with the Hamiltonian inserted in the first quantized way. And this would always in principle capture the ramp and the plateau behavior for any theory that you think is quantum mechanically ergodic, or with, yes, at late times. The thing is that in general this is hard to do, but you get some kind of a technical hold over your calculations once you start integrating over your Hamiltonian. So let me write this again. So you have t of x bar t of x e exponential I x bar e minus h x. Okay. Yes, and if you do some kind of an averaging, so now let me not specify what averaging I'm doing, but if I do this kind of some averaging over Hamiltonian, it could be, so this need not be, let me rephrase, it need not be a averaging over Hamiltonian. So if you remember, I told you that the ramp and the plateau had some quantum fluctuations on top of it. Okay, and in general the way to remove these quantum fluctuations is by doing what we call as some running time average, wherein I average the value of the physical observable between some times, and then I keep doing the running time averages, which basically averages the fluctuations to zero and gives you the smooth curve in some sense, both the ramp and the plateau. So you could do in principle, yeah, you could do at this step some late time averaging, okay, or you could do an actual disorder average, or you could do or you could do some kind of coarse graining where you integrate out certain fields in the theory such that it is some effective description only of the smooth ramp and the plateau, and we believe that the gravity does this. And this is kind of a question that we are trying to explore presently, which is what is the kind of coarse graining that gravity does, that gives rise to only the smooth ramp and plateau, but not the quantum fluctuations around it. Okay, but that apart, if you do some kind of an averaging at this particular step, it gives you some technical handle over your calculations. But it is just a clutch to understand the late time behavior. The fact that it captures, Shubham, just a minute. The fact that it captures the late time physics is itself uh, inbuilt in this construction of of writing the determinant operators in terms of these auxiliary graded fields and treating the Hamiltonian as the first quantized Hamiltonian of the theory. Okay, Shubham, yeah?
Yeah, so I just wanted to understand, get a feel for this this non-perturbative quantity in terms of CFT computation. Like, what would this be in a CFT computation? Like, I mean, this determinant, this thing. So the ramps, I would suggest, I would expect, like, I mean, from this paper by Jensen and Kotler, would be like two different partition functions, like, like connected through a wormhole, or two copies of the partition function and so on, right? I mean, that is the one which gives the ramp. Now, what would the CFT computation be for the plateau, say 2D CFT?
So, CFT computation, as I am describing it here, would really be to say consider the H as a Hamiltonian on the Verma module over the Verma module of the entire spectrum of the theory. So it's like some very complicated maybe you don't need to do it over the entire Verma module, but at least like if you have certain number of states in your theory, certain operator, you need to know the entire spectrum, and then you treat this Hamiltonian as the Hamiltonian over each of those over your entire spectrum of the theory.
See. Okay. Okay. And like, right, and you said, like, that gravity tells you the fine grained, like the smoothed out ramp. There is no computation known now which gives you the wiggly stuff, right?
No, there's no reproduction of the quantum fluctuations from the gravity point of view.
Right. So in some sense, like, it's still an open question to see, actually, like, I mean, my understanding was that, like, people say that, oh, the gravity is dual to average CFT is because we don't know of the quantity that we are supposed to compute in the gravity side. Is that a good way to think about it? Like, or
No, it is not like we don't know. For the ramp, we know what to compute. This is the Euclidean wormholes.
Mhm.
Okay. For the plateau, we don't know what are the geometries from the gravity side, but
I
we
see.
know what gives rise to the plateau behavior in the field theory side, precisely, say, because of all these arguments that we have been using, that they kind of measure the short distance dynamics, and you could demonstrate generically that for any theory which has the random matrix like spectrum, the ramp sorry, the plateau really originates from the level repulsion in the random matrix spectrum.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so I think I don't have more than 10 minutes, so I would not go into the uh, details of the calculations anymore. But what I will do is motivate the effective sigma model action that arises from studying the non-perturbative observables from this construction. And the way to look at it is, for example, suppose I want to look at a physical observable like this, rho 2-point function, which I already said is related to computing R2 on the advanced and the retarded sheets in the energy space. Okay, and so for that, let me write this more clearly in the next page. Sorry. So in if I'm looking at an observable like that, I have energies which are E1 plus, what is the notation I guess, E1, E2, E3, E2 plus, E3 minus, E4 minus, where the minus and plus demonstrate in a way what sheet I am in this multi-valued spectral curve function. Okay, whether I'm on the advanced sheet or the retarded sheet. Good. So I take this, okay, and I see that if all the e's are equal, then this action that I have written is symmetric under rotations in the graded space of, so the graded space is S plus, plus, S minus, chi minus. So there is a 4-dimensional graded space, and each of these, of course, this is actually 4D dimensional graded space, but I'm saying 4-dimensional in the grading. The D is just the Hilbert space dimensions. Okay, so the symmetry corresponding to the rotation within this 4-dimensional graded space between the exchange rotations in the space of bosons and fermions corresponds to some U2 bar 2 symmetry. Okay, and this U2 bar 2 symmetry is explicitly broken when the energy arguments are different. Okay, the energy arguments are different because then any U2 bar 2 rotation would not leave this term in way. So if I have all the energy arguments same, then there is an exact symmetry, otherwise it's broken. But in the kind of calculation that I'm interested in doing, where E1 is taken equal to E2, E3 is taken equal to E4, what I have is that the explicit symmetry breaking takes the U2 bar 2 to U1 bar 1 times U1 bar 1 in some way, and that is precisely because E1 and E2 are same and E3 and E4 are same. Okay, so you still preserve the rotational symmetry in the first two boson fermions and the other remaining boson fermions. Okay, and the difference, so we really take E1 going to E2, say equals E plus omega by 2, and E3 going to E4 equals E minus omega by 2. So the difference is really the difference of energies here is really this omega parameter that gives you the separation in the energy eigenspectrum. So this is when we are saying, this is kind of the calculation that we are doing for rho of E plus omega by 2 and rho of E minus omega by 2. Okay, in this case, yes, so this energy separation is really the symmetry breaking, the explicit symmetry breaking is really measured by the same energy parameter omega that we have, like which measures the separation of the energy scales at which of the eigenstates that I'm interested in. Okay, so that is the omega parameter, and I can treat this explicit symmetry breaking perturbatively when omega is very small. Okay, and that is the idea behind building this sigma model, that now I have if omega equals 0, then I have an exact symmetry. If omega is much smaller than 1, then I can treat the symmetry breaking perturbatively, so the symmetry is broken explicitly from u1 bar 1 to u1 bar 1, and I write down the sigma model on this coset space, which is u2 bar 2 mod u1 bar 1 times u1 bar 1. Okay, so I write down the sigma model on this coset space to capture the dynamics of this system in the limit that omega is much less than 1, which is exactly the limit in which I am probing the dynamics of the neighboring eigenstates. Okay. Wait a minute. I wanted to give. Yes. So in principle, you can look at this more precisely, and what you require is that omega over a, which is the parameter of which gives the width of your spectrum of the quadratic matrix model, that should be much smaller than 1. For example, in the case of, so I've gone back to referring to quadratic matrix model as a concrete example, okay, which translate to that the omega over delta, the energy separations measured in the units of mean level spacing, that should be much smaller than L, where L is really the size of the Hamiltonian. So there are kind of total of L, uh, the Hilbert space is L dimensional. So what this tells you is that when I say omega when I was referring to omega much less than 1, I mean in terms of the mean level spacing, omega over delta is required to be much smaller than the total Hilbert space dimension, and that really means that I can use this perturbation theory effectively to go beyond just one level spacing and compute the effective physics for more than a few level spacings of any quantum theory. Okay, and where this approximation breakdown is really not universal, it's theory dependent, as I had been emphasizing in my previous lecture, that the transition from the non-universal behavior to universal random matrix like behavior, this is really governed by some non-universal physics. So in terms of this model, it is like saying that on if the applicability of this this minute. Okay, sorry, room service came, but anyhow, so the effective applicability of this construction is correct as long as I have like it gives you a self-contained way of predicting where this theory will break down by studying when at for what values of omega the perturbative analysis breaks down. Okay, so just before I go, so, and I'm sorry, I need to go, so I'll take most of the questions on Slack after this, but what I wanted to emphasize before I go is that the sigma model that you write down here gets the correct behavior. So when you do the sigma model over this coset manifold, so this coset manifold is like a sphere times a hyperbolic space. Okay, and when you do the saddle point analysis, you will really find there are two saddle points, but in this theory, which corresponds to the north and the south pole on the sphere. But more importantly, you can do an exact integration over this coset manifold, which again follows from some this exact harmonic, what is it called, dh, what is d and h, I don't remember. It follows from d and h theorems, which tell us that you could do exact integration on coset manifolds. So you could do an exact calculation on this coset manifold. So in the limit where this sigma model is effective, correct description, you can get the correct answer for, say, the rho 2-point function. And what you see is some behavior which is 1 minus sine square omega over delta by omega over delta whole square. Okay, by computing the exact integration on the coset manifold. And when you compare it with what we were doing earlier, you would find that it is capturing both the perturbative and the non-perturbative contribution to, say, the rho 2-point function. In this case here I'm comparing not the 1-point function but the 2-point function up till yes, both the leading order perturbative and non-perturbative contribution, which, as we had emphasized in the previous lectures, was sufficient to get both the ramp. So we argued it for the ramp, but what we see is that when you take the Fourier transform of this quantity, which is really the spectral form factor as a function of time, you generate both the ramp and the plateau behavior at the long time moment. So yeah, I am kind of ending it slightly abruptly, but this is where I would end, but I would still take a couple of questions before I go, if there are any. Yeah, Argo?
Yeah, it's not more like a, I mean, just observation. So here, the sigma model approach that you are doing is kind of, I mean, similar to, I mean, it reminds me of something, the supermatrix models. So in there, and at least in the supermatrix model formalism, what you can take is, you can take here, you have both the H's of same dimension, right? L cross L and L cross L. So
Yeah.
in principle, what one can do is look at different kind of operators in both different sheets in principle. Do you guys do something like that? Or, I mean, is it not, I mean, this is what you do? I mean, in a supermatrix formalism, you can actually do this Hamiltonians. I mean, that both the Hamiltonians are different operators in different sheets, as well as you can insert fermionic operators in the diagonal parts, I mean, of the bold Hamiltonian. So do you do something like that? Because it seems that you are interested in the ρe kind of computation. So there, you need to both the sheets. You need Hamiltonians. I mean, the same Hamiltonian kind of thing.
Yes, I think if there might be some interesting observable that might give me something useful. I haven't looked at something like that, but maybe we can always generalize this to a more general class of observables.
Right. That's what I was. Is there any kind of observable that you would like to look at or something for these things?
I've not thought about that yet.
Okay.
Maybe I can think more about it. No, I don't.
Sure.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I'm sorry I can't stay back for longer and for rushing through this last part. But if you have any additional questions you want references or anything, I'll be happy to provide them over.
Sorry, Pranjit. If you have a few minutes, maybe I have it.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello,
Siddharth. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah. So I had one question regarding your basic motivation. That so you showed us this nice calculation where you said that okay, in the bulk, the 2-point function naively in the semi-classical approximation is going to exponentially decay, but if you include these non-perturbative corrections, then we can get these get these ramp and plateau and so on, right?
Mhm.
And you said that, you were in the beginning you were trying to connect this to the unitarity problem or to the Hawking information paradox problem,
Mhm.
right? But would it be right to say that so if one looked at the original calculation of Hawking and said that the two, he computed 2-point functions there and said that if you look at those 2-point functions, they look like a thermal state, and you started off from a pure state, so you have a contradiction. That we know is not quite correct because exponentially small corrections to 2-point functions can make a thermal state look like a pure state, or a pure state look like a thermal state, right?
Mhm.
And am I to understand that the kind of corrections you are describing are in that spirit, that there are exponentially small corrections which will restore unitarity in this sense, in the sense that the enough, because you could make a pure state look like a thermal state. You're including all of these corrections, and hence trying to see that after including these exponentially small corrections, what looked like a thermal state would now look like a pure state.
Yes, it is in some sense, yes, a demonstration of that fact. Yeah,
And so
I would.
the
Yeah.
I in my mind, the kind of paradoxes that come in this information loss thing can a class of them can be resolved by these exponentially small corrections, but there are also other kinds of paradoxes, not the original one, but other kinds of paradoxes which are not resolved by having exponentially small corrections to the 2-point functions or to the two correlation functions. And those sort of paradoxes, this would not be saying anything about, right? Like the
I don't know. From what I understand, like this, at least the Sigma model, I'm very confident it captures a lot more. I mean, it is very powerful technology which has the capability to capture a lot of physics. It could be possible that some generalization of the Sigma model or directly the Sigma model would be able to capture a more general class of these unitarity problems.
Mhm.
I would also want to emphasize that we still didn't use this to solve, say, the Hawking's problem.
Mhm.
We therefore I restated the unitarity problem not as Hawking's problem but as this 2-point function computation. So its application to other paradoxes or other statements of paradoxes which lead to unitarity loss is something that I believe can be done using Sigma model, but I have not tried it.
I see. And one thing that I knew was an objection to this proposal earlier, but I don't know if has been resolved. Is this thing that I think I forget the authors, Rabinovici and somebody else, and then I think there were some paper by Klaban and so on, where they're trying to argue that even if you included all these all this topology changing geometries in the path integral, you would be able to get late time averages of correlation functions, but not finer details. Essentially, it was coming from an estimate of the Poincare recurrence time in the bulk and in the boundary, and then saying that even after including these geometries, the Poincare recurrence time in the bulk is very small compared to that in the boundary. And the so you had both the amplitude of the correlation amplitude and the Poincare time not matching, but in the late time average, it all turned out fine. So it could still predict the late time average fine, but not the finer details.
Yeah, so in this case, the finer details represent themselves in terms of these quantum fluctuations, and which, of course, we don't right now in the present state of the art, we don't have a reproduction of these fluctuations. But I do think we are exploring this on how to generalize this technology to be able to at least say something more about fluctuations.
Mm,
So
I
that
see.
is something I still I think it can be in some sense this technology could probably be generalized, but this is something that we are trying out still.
I see. I see. And is the idea that to get over those objections, you'd have to find some a new class of geometries that would contribute to these fluctuations and so on? Or?
From the bulk point of view, see, even since the geometric dual of the plateau is not very well understood at this time, saying statements about the bulk is even a step further from
Right, right.
my zone of like comfort, where I would want to say something very concretely.
Okay, okay.
So
All right.
thank you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks
Thanks.
for the
Thanks,
questions.
Pranjal,
Thanks for the
for
discussion.
both Pranjal and
And
Neetu. Neetu is not here, but like for a wonderful series of lectures. And okay.
okay, thanks, Shubham.
Yeah. Bye bye.